Hi guys, welcome to our daily encounter. Today we read about the Passover. And the Passover was all about a time in which God passed over the children of Israel when it came to the destruction, the death of the firstborn in Egypt, the very last plague that would finally cause Pharaoh to let the people go, at least temporarily, till he runs them till he chases after them at the Red Sea. But nonetheless, he was going to allow them to be released after this plague, but it was going to be a very destructive plague and a plague that would bring about death. But the Israelites were going to be spared of this destruction if they followed the rules of the Lord in connection to the Passover. That is, they would take a lamb, each family, each house would take a lamb, and they were to eat the lamb, consume the lamb, but also put the blood of the lamb on the doorpost and the lintel of their house. And as long as they stayed in their house, they would be spared from the destruction that was coming. And this just wasn't something that they would do once. That is, have this Passover lamb and this Passover meal, but it was something that they would continue to observe throughout their generations. And that's what the latter part of Exodus chapter 12 is about. And there's one little aspect of this that I would like to focus on for our devotion today, and it has to do with circumcision. It says in verse 48, well, let's start in verse 47. It says, "All the congregation of Israel are to celebrate this, but if a stranger sojourns with you and celebrates the Passover to the Lord, let all his males be circumcised, and let them come near to celebrate it, and he shall be like a native in the land, but no uncircumcised person may eat of it." No uncircumcised person may eat of it. And so this was a law given by the Lord that if you were going to observe the Passover, you had to be circumcised. And on the surface, this might seem a bit arbitrary. You might wonder, well, what's the connection between being circumcised and observing the Passover? Surely a person could do it just as well being uncircumcised. But probably the quick answer to that would be that this was a way of pointing towards Christ and the realities of Christ. In the New Testament, we're told that Christ is our Passover. In 1 Corinthians chapter 5, in verse 7, it says, "For Christ is our Passover," or Christ our Passover, "also has been sacrificed." And so all these things about the Passover, yes, is connected to the Exodus, but more so, it's connected to Christ, who is our Passover, the one whose blood has allowed us to be spared death. And so Christ is our Passover, and we too celebrate Christ in the way in which he became our lamb, the lamb that took away our sins and took away our death. But for us to take Christ as our Passover, it also entails being circumcised. And I'm not talking about a physical circumcision, but a spiritual circumcision, a circumcision that's talked about in Colossians chapter 2. It says in verse 11, it says, "And in him you were also circumcised with a circumcision made without hands, in the removal of the body of the flesh by the circumcision of Christ, having been buried with him in baptism, in which you were also raised up with him through faith in the working of God, who raised him from the dead." It says, "When you were dead in your transgressions and the uncircumcision of your flesh, he made you alive together with him, having forgiven us of all our transgressions, and having canceled out the certificate of debt consisting of decrees against us, which was hostile to us." And so Jesus Christ is the one who caused us to be circumcised, and it's in connection to our coming to him. And here Paul ties it to baptism. And if you cross-reference Romans chapter 6, you see that in baptism, we are dying with the Lord. Our old self is crucified with him. We are buried with him in baptism, raised to walk in newness of life. And it's a picture of putting off the body of sin, putting off of the flesh, being ruled by the flesh is the idea. In Romans chapter 2, in verse 29, it says, "But he is a Jew who is one inwardly, and circumcision is that which is of the heart by the Spirit, not by the letter, and his praise is not from men, but from God. And so we, as New Testament believers, and those who have Christ as their Passover, also have a circumcision, but it's a circumcision, not a fleshly circumcision, but one of the heart, in which we no longer walk according to the flesh, but now we walk according to the Spirit. But the same rule would apply, that if we want to enjoy Christ as our Passover, we have to be circumcised, just as it's talked about in Exodus chapter 12. Those who wanted to partake of the Passover, they had to be circumcised. No uncircumcised person was to eat of it. And we too, if we want to celebrate Christ, if we want to have Christ in our lives, or celebrate him as our Passover, we got to also accept the other side of the coin, which is we have to give our lives over to him and to begin to live according to the Spirit, in step with the Spirit, and crucifying the flesh. And of course, we know that sometimes we're going to mess up. Sometimes we aren't always going to do that perfectly. And fortunately, we have the blood of Christ to cover our sins when we make mistakes. As 1 John chapter 1 and verse 9 says, if we confess our sins, he is faithful and righteous to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. But still, the main idea here is that we should accept the fact that by accepting Christ as our Passover, we also are accepting the fact that we are to die with him, that we're no longer to live according to the flesh. And that should be the normal process that we go through as we receive him as our Passover. So here's some things we can think about and reflect on as we do our reading today. With that, guys, I thank you for watching the video today. Hope you guys have a great day. Love you guys. God bless.